It's been a long day. We've covered a lot of stuff, so we've left a nice, easy subject for last, which is what are we going to do about changing technology and a changing workforce. Um, and I sort of reflection on this. We were talking about a little bit about AI earlier, and also in one of the breakout sessions. Um, if anyone can remember back to the start of the day, it feels like a long time ago now. That's charts that I was, on reflection, overly proud of, which had I need to narrow it down, which had a section, a load of bubbles on it for the employment rates in different cities. I created that jointly with AI with Claude Code. I did check the figures, I promise you, but actually it created it and made it look better much more quickly than I would have been able to. But I did need to know broadly what I was talking about and whether it made any sense. I had to engage my brain. You can't just outsource this stuff. This may be a topic we cover a little bit during today's session, because we're combining that technological change with longer working lives and an aging population. So it's us that need to channel our inner Douglas Adams, what we talked about earlier, and mediate what we do with that new technology. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to, you almost, no, not quite sat in the order I've got on my page, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Oliver first, and then Fiona, and then Kate, and then Nimi, and then Patrick. That's everyone, isn't it? I've not missed anyone. It's been a long day. Uh, right, so we're going to do this in that order. So, Oliver, you're the Director of Innovation at the Institute for the Future of Work. Kind of, we talk a lot about AI, but there's other stuff going on as well. How do you see that future of work being shaped over the years ahead?
Yeah, yeah, great to see you all. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's it's obviously a kind of a big topic. I mean, I think thinking about the kind of title we have here, I think I'd be quite cautious about thinking of this as framing this too much as kind of workers needing to kind of adapt to this, because I think obviously there's a kind of there's an aspect of this that's kind of individual in terms of kind of young people, particularly kind of preparing themselves for work. But ultimately, this is a kind of structural challenge where we're kind of thinking through now. I think if we look at our work and we at the Institute think across three levels, so kind of system, firm, and individual. I guess at the kind of system level, that's very much around the kind of labor market change, around skills, and lots of people have talked about different kind of aspects of that. I think some of the changes, I think particularly significant to learning, are kind of changes around the types of skills required, and particularly kind of greater diversity, entry level increasing kind of requirements in terms of qualifications and kind of expertise. Um, Particularly more diversity of skills as well. So kind of vacancies covering more different domains in terms of the kind of skills required, not just, for example, technical skills, but kind of various kinds of kind of knowledge competencies and also human-centric skills. Um, if we look at the kind of firm level, but we do a lot of work with kind of business and employers. There's there's obviously huge variation across employers in terms of kind of AI adoption. So, obviously some employers, it's fair to say, kind of really racing ahead with this, in kind of various ways in terms of their adoption. There's obviously other organizations that are, yeah, adoption kind of remains relatively low. I think what's relatively consistent across them that we found is the organizations that are, kind of thriving and flourishing with this are taking a kind of socio-technical approach, so really not just thinking about technology from purely a productivity point of view, but really thinking about it in terms of how we can kind of bring the best of human and machine kind of capabilities. Um, on the kind of last bit, just around kind of individuals, the one of the bigger areas we're focused on is particularly around kind of entry level jobs. I think there's obviously been a huge amount of kind of press coverage and media coverage about this. I think it's much more nuanced, I think, than probably some of that like implies. The honest truth is, I don't think we really know exactly what's happening so far, and we also certainly don't know how that's going to evolve longer term. I think the best available evidence at the moment suggests that, generally from the US, based on payroll data, there is some decline in kind of entry level roles for the most exposed to automation roles, but That's not necessarily the case in the UK. The figures look a bit lower than that, and I think it's very hard for us to disentangle that from things that other speakers have mentioned around national insurance, for example, the energy shock. So it's a kind of complex picture at the moment. But I think just finishing, I think that our view is that in terms of kind of preparing people for that, it's really going to be thinking about how we think about kind of skills bundles from a learning point of view, kind of combinations of skills rather than just focusing on kind of a few skills like AI skills, for example, that are going to kind of prepare people in the future.
Fabulous. Thank you, Oliver. Fiona, if I go across to you next, so I'm supposed to have introduced the panelists at the start of this. I'm going to do it as we go along now. The ship has sailed. I think I got away with it. So Fiona is the chief executive of the Skills Federation and also on the board of Skills England. And those of you in the previous session will know she used to work for the West Midlands Combined Authority and was formerly of this parish at the Learning and Work Institute, dare I say, as well. So Fiona, what's your perspective on what matters most and what can make most difference to helping us deal with that transition?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a little bit about where I suppose a sense, as Oliver says, about how much we really know about what is changing and therefore how we can respond to it. Completely agree with Oliver's point that perhaps we are overestimating the impact in the short run. I always get asked about the impact on entry level jobs of AI, for example, and I think a lot of it is about economic conditions rather than AI. But I'm sure it is absolutely true to say that we're probably underestimating the impact on all of our jobs in the long run, both for young people and for adults. And so I think one of the key challenges for us is not to kind of guess what the skills system needs to be next year or in 5 years' time, but actually to really invest in trying to understand the challenges as we go and to make sure we've got a skills system that is responsive enough to both meet the needs as they arise, but really importantly, to make sure that we continue to, and this is for individuals and for employers, to be able to access that skills training, to understand what we need, to be able to easily access it, because it's not just going to change once and then we're done. We're going to have to continue to update and develop our skills for our workplaces and for ourselves over many years. So I think one of the big challenges, and we've talked about lifelong learning for decades, of course we have, but I think even more now, we've got to find a system that's responsive, that we can dip in and dip out of. And lots of us, and I'm sure many of us in this room, do that all the time. But what we know from Learning and Work's participation survey, had to get it in there, was that actually for a whole group of adults, this is just not something that they're engaging with. Those people who are well educated will continue to train and engage. They'll probably be in good jobs where their employers do that for them. But there is a real risk, given the scale and the pace of change, that we leave people behind. And that's a challenge we've all got to face.
Great, thank you, Fiona. Yeah, and I think the point that the future is unknowable. We can kind of have a sense of direction of travel, but anyone who tells you their precise predictions about how they know exactly what's going to happen is definitely wrong. So that kind of flexibility and preparation, I think, is absolutely vital. And Kate, so the next speaker is Kate Bell, who's the Assistant General Secretary of the TUC. And we know Kate from lots of previous technological transitions and changes that the impacts of these things are often mediated through how we choose to do things and the voice of workers, including trades unions and others as well. So I'm kind of interested in your perspective on this topic.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen, and thanks for inviting me. I was just remembering as I came in here, I think like one of the first ever speaking engagements I ever did was about 20 years ago at a Learning and Work Institute convention, and I was very, very scared then. But that reflection is relevant for this topic because it's interesting how slow change is. Like we all have these conferences about AI where we've got some people on a stage sat on chairs and some people in an audience having a conversation in the way that would be familiar to people for at least the last 50 years and probably the last 100. So I think, as you say, Stephen, it's important not to make kind of predictions about the sort of dizzying pace of change that we can't necessarily back up. And I think there's opportunities and risks here for workers. So in terms of the opportunities, really interesting document, I think, is Microsoft's Future of Work report from 2025, which says things like organizational AI depends as much on employees as leaders, and centering worker voice in AI design boosts productivity, satisfaction, and skill growth. design it, driving both business success and worker flourishing. So I'm kind of quoting Microsoft to show it's not just us saying this, basically, that there is a real opportunity to say, we're not going to implement new technology unless we actually engage with workers. Of course, there's risks there as well. And I think, key risk is our current culture is short-termist. We have poor management skills. We have a lack of employer investment in training, and a hollowing out of kind of some of the other systems which support workers. And if we just kind of take that system and layer AI onto the top of it, workers could lose out. So, what are some of the institutions we could put in place to ensure that workers do have a voice in that transition? First is just those general conditions where workers have a stronger voice in their workplace. We've got the Employment Rights Act going through right now. Well, it's gone through, but some of the legislation is being implemented. That does give workers a stronger voice. It's about boosting trade union representation. And, from the Industrial Revolution, workers having that voice in technological change has been really, really important. The TUC actually kind of worked on our own draft piece of legislation called the AI and Employment Act. We published it as a piece of it's a lobbying tool, but we published it as a piece of legislation to show it was actually possible to make changes. And we talked about workers having a right to be consulted when new AI technologies are being introduced into their workplace. And that's a step that would both reassure workers about how they're going to be used, but also enable them to identify what is the training I need to actually be able to use this. Is this going to work, or is this like that kind of classic IT level change that we've all seen where you think, if I'd had a say in this, I could have told them it wasn't going to work. Like that's going to be the same with AI. I think we do need to kind of rebuild those institutions where workers have a say in the policy design level. And I am on the Industrial Strategy Advisory Council, where we've been particularly thinking about that for the industrial strategy sectors. And I think what we kind of know we need is at a sectoral level and possibly at a regional level, those institutions where we're bringing employers, workers, government together to say, okay, we've all got insight into this system. How is it changing? What are the skills we need? And what can we collectively do to respond to that? And that's going to involve government giving up a little bit of control and power too, and to devolve something to those institutions. And then last point in my 1 minute is just to learn from what works, basically. So we've got loads of experience enabling workers to take up more skills. We used to run something called the Union Learning Fund. That was a partnership between unions, employers, and government, and basically involved union learning representatives encouraging their colleagues into training. I can say more about it when we've got more time, but huge return on investment, real track record of success, scrapped under the last government. About time it came back.
Fabulous. Thank you, Kate. And if we've learned nothing else today, we've learned that if you speak at this conference, you can become the Assistant General Secretary of the TUC or the Prime Minister. Probably. So, look out for next year. Right. Nimi, over to you next. So Nimi Patel is the Associate Director at Tech UK, and Nimi, really interested in the voice of employers, and particularly in the tech sector, and how we can make the most of this technology and these changes.
Absolutely. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that we just signed up and we're a proud signatory of the Learning and Work Institute's Get the Nation Learning campaign. We're a member of the Skills Federation. We worked with Kate and the TUC on the AI and Employment Bill. We're friends of the Institute for the Future of Work. Patrick, we don't work together, so we should, very clearly. And that's not me boasting. It's just talking about something really important that Lord Willett said in his kind of opening remarks this morning around collaboration, of how important the tech sector has found it to be collaborating with everyone. We're talking about this important issue. And the important issue is essentially tech for people. It's really sometimes difficult to wade against some of the noise that we're hearing around tech being a baddie, which sometimes it is, and it's our job essentially on this panel to kind of alleviate some of those issues by focusing in on people and where that matters. That collaboration aspect is really important to us. So we joined the government's AI Skills Boost program, which is a commitment that government have made to upskill 10 million people with AI skills by 2030. I've been running a series of workshops around the country. I was in Newcastle last week where it was freezing. We were in Bath a couple of weeks ago as well, and soon to be coming to a city near you, talking about AI skills with a number of different companies like Salesforce, Microsoft, IBM, giving different kind of viewpoints on AI, also, helping people train up in building agentic AI. From those sessions, what I've learned to be the most crucial thing is AI literacy, and that's AI literacy for all. When we went to school, we all learned about photosynthesis and how a light bulb works. We needed to know that whether or not we became botanists or electricians, and AI literacy is fundamentally that. How AI is used responsibly, not only in the workplace, but within sort of schools and for personal use. It's unbelievably important because no one knows how these things work. And if we can educate ourselves and the people around us, I think we become safer at using such tools that hopefully enhance our day-to-day lives. Those things are really important for the tech sector. We're a high skill, high wage kind of industry, but we're seeing massive amounts of skills gaps. TechUK represents 1,100 tech businesses, and those employ sort of 1.1 million people, and all of them need skills and talent to be able to deliver the products and services that you all enjoy. Interestingly, 40% of the semiconductor industry is due to retire in 15 years. Semiconductors are chips, so chips that power electricity, and about 66% of data center operators and managers find digital skills gaps. Data centers are what underpin the internet and are the backbone of the internet, if you don't know that. So we're seeing these gaps, and it just means that we're not going to be able to harness AI if we don't have the people to be able to work towards it. What's interesting is about 3 years ago, I did a series of workshops on what the metaverse was going to do for the workplace. Anybody ever used the metaverse? Yeah, where is that nonsense now, right? But fundamentally, what came out of those conversations were the things that Kate was talking about around practical implementation and support for people in terms of training, but leveraging the technology in a safe way that enables people in the workplace to thrive. So, loads of things out there.
Fabulous. Thank you, Nimi. And there will be a quiz on how light bulbs work at the end of the convention, so do stay around for that. Right, last but not least, so Patrick Craven is our final speaker. Patrick is the Public Affairs Partnership and Engagement Director at City and Guilds. And Patrick, City and Guilds is an awarding body, so I guess we're kind of really interested in how do we need to improve how our qualification system keeps up with all of those really big changes that we've just been talking about.
No, certainly, Stephen. And I think, so I guess there's a few points I'd like to highlight. When City and Guilds has been around for well over 100 years now, and interestingly, I guess, has developed as an organisation alongside a number of the previous revolutions, whether it's agricultural, industrial revolution, etc. And in all of those moments of human innovation, however much resistance there was, it's never stopped the change happening, where that change was always going to happen within a sector. And equally, it's never actually applied to every profession in the country. And I think there's a little bit of a danger that we get these very holistic statements about the impact of AI. In the same way as when we talk about NEETs, that over 1 million, that's not a homogeneous group of people. At one end of that group, if you've got graduates looking for employment, very different prospect to supporting young people who fall out of education much earlier, whole range of different issues going on. And the same with the jobs market. AI will impact the jobs market, but it won't impact it all in a uniform way. And therefore, you have to reflect on what are the professions and where might AI have an impact. I'd actually go one step backwards from that, though, and say we seem to, and might be wrapped up in pace of change issues. Every default conversation more recently has become about AI, and we kind of forget, well, what about the digital skills platform foundation that you need to have in the first place to even start to think about engaging with AI? And when you start to call that out, organisations like Future.now with their 25-point framework, they make this point very validly that one of the big deficits at the moment in the country is basic digital skills across a whole range of professions and workforce, that unless you raise that to a certain level, you're not going to realise productivity gains, because oftentimes companies invest in technology in the hope of getting a productivity gain. If their workforce is not confident in using technology, they'll never get anywhere near that productivity gain. And equally with AI, to start to really utilise and appreciate AI, you need to have a certain level of confidence about using technology and skills, etc. But where we see these things
sort of changing matters. And it's slightly ironic, I think, in the tech centre, and I might be wrong here because I'm not that familiar with the tech centre, but one of the things that I hear is how quickly AI has penetrated programming. And therefore, you've got this interesting juxtaposition with the technology-driven innovation and actually having a serious impact on programmers and coders. Now, it's not got rid of the need for programmers and coders. It's caused them to maybe do their work in a much more efficient way, and working that way. But they've adapted to that, and they will adapt to those things. One of the things we've been thinking about more recently is starting to think about the world of work as we often traditionally would refer to it as a range of jobs, and you'll hear job descriptions, that's how things are advertised. And typically, when you categorize jobs and professions, that's how it's done, at that kind of top level label. But if you start to think about that as jobs, tasks, skills, and say most jobs are made up of a range of tasks, and those tasks require a range of skills to deliver those tasks. And then you start to think about AI and say, how does AI potentially engage in the tasks that I can do? Whether that's creating a chart for a presentation, however you choose to use AI, and therefore, does it have a benefit? And the next step from that is, does it displace that task entirely? Or does it just make my ability to engage with that task a little bit more efficient than it was? Now, the only time you really need to worry is when you look at all of the tasks within your job and realize AI can do all of them. I can automate all of them straight away. And that won't be the case in every situation. For many people, I think AI will be integrated into their jobs in their workplace, and they'll learn to use it effectively. But then the skills required to do the task become slightly different. So if the skills are AI skills that you need to utilize to achieve that new task, then that's the kind of level that we need to be integrating AI skills. So we would always be a few steps behind innovation because that's the nature of qualifications and accreditation. I'd like to think that some of the emerging models of smaller chunks of learning units, things like that, are one of the ways that we'll address it going forwards. So what we can start to do is to bolt on top up units, things of that nature, which allow us to address and keep pace with innovation. If you get to a stage where it's overtaking it completely, then it changes the curriculum for that job completely, or that job becomes very different, full stop, in terms of where those things are.
Fabulous. Thank you, Patrick. Right, so lots of different perspectives, lots of different issues about how this works in the world of work, how the roles of or implications for workers and employers kind of intersect. How does our skill system keep up with all of this? So I'm going to open it up and see if anyone's got any questions that they would like to ask. So we're going to go for one at the back, please, and then one just in the, I'm going to say front middle.
Thank you very much. I'm Emily Tanner from the Nuffield Foundation. I heard sort of real consensus that we can't predict the future to a great extent, but we need a system which is adaptive. And I wondered what the panel thinks of the implications for the curriculum and the education and training system. If we want young people to be AI literate, and the world ahead is constantly changing. How do we prepare young people for both the skills they need, but also giving them enough information and confidence to be able to develop career plans in such an uncertain world?
Oh, it's on now. I'm John McMahon. I'm with GMCA. I'm in Nicola's team, the education work and skills team. A lot of thoughts on this. I'll try and condense them. It's easy to think about AI as almost, or any new technology as a sort of tide that is going to erode coastline, take jobs away in tranches, entry level roles, and advance onwards. I feel like something that I'm witnessing, maybe other people have noticed it, is more a sort of Swiss cheesing of the workplace where it's creating pockets of erosion. I'm just really interested in, if I might be indulged, who's actively engaging AI in their work at the moment in the room? Quite a lot, probably just over half. Who feels like their employer has a clear policy or guidance or anything that sets out the parameters of appropriate use of AI in your workplace? Okay, so higher than I expected, but less than the number of people that are using it. I feel like I'm seeing a lot of sort of feral AI usage. I really, sort of both untrained, going to Nimi's point of AI literacy, but not with guardrails in place from the employer either. A really clarifying moment for me was seeing two quite senior employee colleagues, not in this role, I should hasten to add, sort of ping-ponging. They were both time poor, harassed, and they're both using different chatbots to try and respond to each other for a piece of work. And you almost get to a point, well, what's the point of the human mediation there? What should be the kind of policy response, and how do organizations need to grapple with this phenomena? I hope that there's a lot of thoughts in there. I hope that's a relatively coherent question in the end.
Thank you. Yeah. So I guess the 2 points are: one, the future's unknowable. Given that, how do we prepare young people? We were telling people to train as coders like 3 years ago, weren't we? That doesn't seem quite as wise now. And then secondly, this is a point about technology adoption, isn't it? Within employers, and how we make the most of it rather than just doing stuff slightly randomly, and doing it in ways that improve productivity, but also improve people's jobs. So those are two pretty big questions. Who would like to start us off on this one? Either of those. Kate, yeah.
I'll do the second one. It's just your example reminded me of this cartoon I saw, which I really like, which has got two people emailing each other on, one saying, I've written 3 bullet points and AI has turned it into a comprehensive, elegant email. And then the other one saying, I've got no time to read this email. AI has turned it into 3 bullet points for me, which I think like summarizes how lots of us are using it. And I think it's also about how we kind of have the conversation, that sometimes there's a feeling like we're all meant to be using AI. And I've heard from kind of boards, that there's a real kind of premium on businesses being told, you've got to have AI, you're not going to be competitive, basically. And I don't know how we do it, but there's a real job to change the conversation into where do we need to improve productivity, what tasks need more efficiency, and how can we use AI to do that, and to get away from the kind of panicky, is it taking all the jobs, to which jobs would we like it to replace because we need to move those skills elsewhere? Like what do we actually want it for? I like your coastline Swiss cheese comments. I think the other thing though that is really important to think about, whether it's a coastline or whether it's kind of Swiss cheese with particular jobs, is the wider economic context really matters. So Fiona talked about, we don't really know if what's going on with young people is affected by AI, or just like we've got a slightly softening labor market, and young people are always at the front end of labor market softening. So what we do know we need to do, whatever is happening, is an economy where you've got jobs for everybody, where there is a skill system which responds if your job is changing and responds quickly. And if you are in the situation where you're going to lose your job, you've got a social security system which is going to adequately support you, so that isn't a disaster. And I think we could spend a bit more time thinking about what are the conditions in which AI can be adopted effectively, rather than just which job is it going to take or which task will it replace.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I was glad all the L&W staff put their hands up in response to their guidance on use of it. It shows they've read this week's internal newsletter, so this is excellent news. But I think that the point about adoption, Nimi, I'm going to come to you next, because I remember in the late 90s, I think it was, the economist Robert Solow said that the computer revolution was showing up everywhere except the productivity statistics. And we're kind of like pinging emails around rather than just having a quick chat about things. So how do we fast forward and avoid that bit and get good adoption that solves some of the problems that Kate was talking about?
Absolutely. It comes down to managers and senior leadership teams really trying to understand what they're using the technology to solve. Because AI adoption and digital adoption is expensive. So if you're integrating these new tools and technologies and you're not actually supporting it to find out a solution or a problem, you're doing nothing for nothing's sake. What's interesting on the early career side of things is that we have a junior member of the team who used to write minutes. That's no longer needed because now we generate minutes through the transcript. But this person, we found those who are in entry level roles, they while writing minutes, they got to absorb loads of different information about the different meetings that were happening, and became real policy experts in understanding what was happening in those meetings, right? So now they don't have to do the kind of secretarial work. But we had to make some decisions about what we do with them then. And it was important to still have them in the room. But actually, now, this time, they would concentrate rather than taking minutes and getting everything down. So they're still getting the experience. And, the technology is helping, doing it in a really great way. They don't have to write horrible minutes anymore. But they're still part of the meetings and still getting the understanding. That took, a bit of kind of, well, what do we want this person to do? And what do we want their aims and goals to be? And how do we want them to progress in the organization? It's so funny how many kind of tech adoption solutions and questions come down to people and come down to what we want people to actually do with their time, and how good do we want the workplace to be. For example, and this might not happen to a lot of people, but when my team, if they're done for the day and if they've done enough, I'm like, go walk the dog, go have a nap, right? Most industries won't feel that way. But if we're implementing new technologies and new solutions, right, you've got people becoming more and more productive. If you know the concept and what solutions they're looking to aim to get to, what are you going to ask them to do with their time? And also, how do you support the fact that they might be overworking in the end? They might be too productive. How do you support them in burnout? How do you support them with the well-being aspect of having these technologies? Those are questions we need to and you have solutions for. And it's really important for HR and business leaders to get into that conversation before they start implementing the technology. An interesting one is sort of AI and recruitment. Kate and I, we've spoken about this previously, because TUC has some really great guidance. Plugging that, have a look around that. But automated decision making and recruitment is supporting HR leaders to reduce their workloads, shift CVs, but it's also having a negative impact, because we're seeing actually more and more people leverage AI in their CVs, in their applications. So it's a bit dystopian, where you've got machines talking to each other, like your example. How do we ensure that a human is still at the core, at the epicenter, still making those decisions and still being responsible, and making sure that their biases aren't the kind of algorithmic biases in AI and recruitment aren't letting and affecting their kind of pace of work? Again, it's a solution that I think people have to discuss, and those conversations are kind of hard to discuss when you're talking about digital adoption, because it always comes down to cost and time.
Yes. Now, we haven't covered the youth question. I was going to come to you. We're in sync, so over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, just picking up on the AI point as well, I think one of the things that always strikes me about innovation is that probably our most precious commodity is time. It's the one thing that we cannot change the parameters of 24 hours in a day. And yet we're always striving to make the best use of that 24 hours. Now, I think the reality of probably some of the technology interventions, if anything, is probably eaten even more into our use of time, because we suddenly find that we don't switch off. And therefore, there's this constant desire to be responding to things all the time. And that's just a different issue about how we choose to cope with the ability to be always on, or choose to switch off when we want to. So I think you're always going to have that struggle with AI, that it's a bottom-up innovation. Companies are struggling to work out even what people are doing with AI in the company, because they do it. They just go and do it because human nature means that we'll try and do things quicker than we did before. The mundane tasks we'll try and get done a different way. In terms of the curriculum and the kind of the impact into the curriculum, so I think a really interesting debate to be had is, does AI go on the banned list along with all the other things in the history of time which we've chosen to ban because we didn't think they should be allowed in school and education? Or do we accept that AI is here and it's a tool that we should use to shape, and we should understand how that integrates then into the work that we do? I still have debates with people about whether you should allow a calculator in a maths exam, and that debate's long gone in terms of how that features in terms of our ability to do mental arithmetic or not. From our perspective with AI, I think one of the ways in which you can influence curriculum actually is in our role in terms of accreditation and assessment, because accreditation and assessment has a very powerful backwash effect into curriculum and into teaching. So therefore, if the sort of things that you're judging and you want to see demonstrated start to accentuate the types of skills that might be utilized through AI, you will see it start to appear in the curriculum, because people recognize that actually there's some value in doing that. We get recognized. If you choose to ban it, I think the danger is you'll just create an even bigger disconnect between education and the world of work, because as they transition from education with all of the emphasis on what is still largely written, timed exams, memory recall, they suddenly find themselves in the world of work and never be asked to do that ever again for their working life. So there is, I think, a bit of a transition to be done there in terms of how we blend what we judge and what we measure, which then has a kind of an impact back into curriculum as well.
Okay. Fiona, did you and then Oliver, if you want?
Yeah, certainly. So, as well as having NIMI as one of my wonderful members at Skills Federation, there are sort of 18 other organisations that are thinking about the sort of future skills needs of their sectors. And it's really interesting to hear what they are thinking about AI and automation when it's not their main sector. And I guess some of the key things that have come out, and they're all quite variable, although some strong themes, is that it's not about teaching about particular applications, because by the time you've designed a course, put a student on it, and come out, then we're probably not using that anymore. But that it is really thinking about those kind of human skills that are needed alongside technology to really make it work. So, talking to our one of our members who works in financial services, where there's lots of use of AI actually, and a really, really interesting report about the impact of AI on the workforce that is worth having a look at. But for them, it's skills around, it's analytical skills, it's about judgment that's really, really important. And so actually they say, actually, the most attractive graduates that we often go to, and this is financial services, is history. Because actually what we're teaching history students is those analytical skills of looking at evidence and thinking about what it means. So it may not be the content, but the ways of thinking. The other thing that members are flagging is that with entry level jobs as we knew them disappearing or being replaced by entry level but at a higher level, then what is it that we're missing that we used to teach our young people in jobs? And therefore, how do we build it into our educational provision so that that first bit, when you get to work and sit in a meeting and hear all those things, if that job isn't there anymore, it might have changed, it might have disappeared. How do we build it into our education offer in colleges, universities, and training providers? Important things, I think, for our programme design.
Thanks, Fiona. Oliver?
Yeah, so I guess just picking up on the I guess another kind of aspect to kind of Emily's question around, which I think is really important, around kind of how people develop the kind of confidence and skills. And certainly think kind of, yeah, career education, I think, is absolutely crucial. And I think we have made progress with that. But I think that does need to, I think kind of further kind of investment and development of that would be beneficial. I think our work's kind of looked at the kind of Gatsby benchmarks, so certainly kind of progress schools are kind of making there. But, looking back at the kind of previous, there's like a survey that Sutton Trust did that I think showed that around 40% of young people don't do any kind of substantive kind of work experience. So we still have some kind of real challenges there. Some of those have been touched on earlier around kind of work as, kind of opportunities to make that kind of simpler for employers. I think there's probably, I guess the nature of our work means we often get asked kind of, what jobs will be safe or kind of what skills will be needed. So I kind of agree with all the points mentioned there around, I think that but there's probably a risk of kind of like overcorrecting here and kind of just thinking we need to completely change the curriculum. I've kind of previously worked in kind of skills policy and government, and I used to in that role find kind of the education system was a bit slow in terms of how it was responding. But I sort of now think that actually I think kind of having a longer term view, thinking about kind of broader capabilities across these different kind of subjects, I think is really important, rather than thinking we need to kind of completely change it because of AI. But in terms of kind of the career education bit, I think that's about kind of embedding that kind of across the curriculum, like thinking more about career inspiration rather than kind of just identifying like a specific role that might change. Thinking about kind of career coaching, for example, I think is going to be really important. I think there's really good examples, I think, in other countries the UK can still learn from. Estonia have something called hobby schools, for example, where young people get kind of opportunities to, kind of develop their hobbies, kind of both in and outside school. Finland's got a very much a problem-based learning approach, and I think that's almost less about completely changing the curriculum and more about the kind of pedagogy, maybe. And I think that, we've obviously touched on lifelong learning, but I think one of the key skills is going to be that kind of meta skill of, metacognition skills around teaching yourself to learn and how do you know what you know to some extent. So I think there's a couple of ideas there, but I think that kind of the core of it, kind of career education, is going to be quite key.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. Nimi, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, so in our curriculum and assessment review response, we spoke at length about how to integrate digital throughout the curriculum. So using digital in geography and history. DFE then came back to us and said, well, how do we do that? Which is really nice because you never expect that from them. And so we sent them a long form piece around what certain tech businesses like Samsung, for example, are doing to support D&T D&T qualifications, IBM, for example, leveraging kind of AI within schools and how to support teachers and upskilling them in that. It's really tough because the core principles are all around sort of building creativity and critical thinking using digital and making sure that those kinds of digital components sit across the curriculum rather than sit within a specific kind of computing qualification like computer science or ICT. In 2019, we surveyed parents and guardians who work in the tech sector about how they feel the curriculum is and the education system is working for their young people. And in 2024, we did the same survey, except we updated a lot of the questions around sort of AI and education. And some of the things you kind of expect around parents and guardians not feeling as confident that the education system is delivering for their young people. Around 70% of respondents believe that schools weren't focusing on the core competencies like critical thinking. They kind of spoke at length about kind of 59% of children were not pursuing computing qualifications despite the fact that their parents worked in the industry, so they knew how important this was. But interestingly to me, even though kind of these parents and guardians who worked in the sector knew more about apprenticeships, knew more about technical and vocational education, 54% believe that degrees might matter less in the future. Despite this, they would prefer their young to go to university, despite the fact of acknowledging how important apprenticeships were. I mean, that for me was a big key takeaway, along with some other stuff around EdTech, which I can send you. But that was a key takeaway for me, that there's such a disconnect between kind of what we've all focused on, which is apprenticeships for all. Another thing I very much disagree with government for. Apprenticeships should not just be for young people, should be for all. But how parents and guardians are still not even though they're recognizing apprenticeships are great, they're not, supporting young people into making those kinds of decisions.
Okay, thank you, Nimi. Now we're coming towards time, so Kate, I'm going to come back to you just really briefly, and then if any of the other panelists just want to give a very, very brief, that clock is ticking. We've got a clock ticking down here. It's very pressurizing. Then I'll let you do so. But Kate first.
I guess just a sort of note about the importance of joining up some of these conversations, because at the moment it's a really weird sort of disconnect in skills policy, where you've got one set of skills policy which is saying employers can't hire anybody, it's really hard, and we're going to need all these skills in the future. You look at Skills England's projections of kind of unfilled skills. You've got another big public policy conversation going on about an aging population and how we won't have enough workforce. And then you've got this conversation going on here, which kind of says there's not going to be any jobs for anybody to go to. And I don't quite know how we take a step back and look at those kind of trends together. But it really strikes me every time I'm in the AI conversation, I'm a bit like, hang on, there's this conversation about how there's not enough social care worker, still I think 300,000 vacancies in social care. And just, it's a challenge, I think, particularly for skills policy to join those conversations together.
Yes, I agree. Lots of things end up slightly in isolation and disconnected. Very briefly, but you can see the
I
clock.
can see the clock, and I've got a matter of seconds. Just picking up on that observation about this disconnected policy statements and there's going to be no jobs. I think my counter to that would be, I think there will be jobs. The nature of those jobs will be different. We just need to quickly understand what that is. We've seen a massive uplift in a lot of engagement with our electrical technician programs, because a lot of people are going to that for two reasons. One, saying, I can't see AI replacing this anytime soon in terms of the skills and what I'm trying to do. But also, when you look at all of the various net zero clean energy initiatives, all roads lead to electricity. So they're recognizing that actually even data centers and things like that are very electricity hungry, in terms of just recognizing where are the jobs going to be, because I think it is going to be a bit of a migration transition scenario.
Perfect timing. I am going to draw us to a close there, because we're going to go into negative time, and I don't know what happened, like a paradox at that point. So I'm sorry, because we could have talked about this for a lot longer. But can I ask you to give our panel a really big round of applause?